All right. Okay, so let's get started. Again, welcome everybody to the Capacity Building Center for Tribes. My name is Jackie Croshu, or Indigenous Gakadus Aki. I work for the center, and I'm going to help facilitate today's webinar. I am a member of the Turtle Mountain Band in North Dakota and from the Fish Clan. And it's really a pleasure having worked in Indian country for many years, having worked with state departments. This topic has been something that's come up over and over and over again, recognizing this is a federal law that came in 1979. We still have a lot of conversations to be holding around this. So what we really want to do today is just bring that to you, bring that conversation to you. Again, it's not a training. We want to make sure that none of us that are here today presenting are coming with, we're not attorneys, we're not judges working on the bench. We're really folks who have actually done the work, both with the State Department and the tribes. So that is what we're bringing for you. And if we see that there are a lot of questions coming in from the chat room that we're not able to get to, we want to make sure that we capture those and then get back to you with the resources. But the goal today is really to get you as many resources as we can and answer the best that we can. I want to thank our federal officer. I believe Dr. Shoulders is on with us today. Dr. Roshanda Shoulders is our federal officer with the Capacity Building Center for Tribes. I also want to thank Nancy Lucero and Kathy Deserly. They are our directors, our co-directors. And I don't know if Bob Lindekamp is on, but if you're on, I also want to thank you for all the work and support you do. So we do have an hour and 15 minutes. So it's not a lot of time, but a part of it is just wanting to also acknowledge that so many of you, like myself, are on Zoom all day long. And then we're also multitasking and we have so much going on. So I just want to recognize, we're going to get through this the best we can, hour and 15 minutes. But I do plan to just kind of go over some of the benefits and the importance of active efforts, where it comes from. We have a state and some tribes with us, and they want to share some of their roles in active efforts. And any best practice. Minnesota, as you'll know, has higher standards. So we'll get to kind of hear what they are doing to implement active efforts. So it looks like most of you have indicated who you are in the chat room, and I appreciate that. Again, I want our peers out there just to kind of see who's on the call. So if there's anybody that you recognize or want to say hello to, or if you have a question for them, feel free to use that chat room as Laura indicated. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about just the spirit of ICWA. And I say the spirit because I recognize that there is some intent in this. The Indian Child Welfare Act is really what I'm referring to. It was enacted in 1978, and most of us know it was in response to the devastating number of American Indian and Alaska Native children being removed from their families and placed in non-Native homes. And I always remind folks that, this is something that we're still experiencing today. But the idea with ICWA was to establish minimum federal jurisdictional procedure and standards aimed to achieve the dual purposes of protecting the right of an Indian child to live with an Indian family and to stabilize and foster that continued tribal existence. We recognize that ICWA can be labeled as the gold standard, and this is something I have really come to appreciate. I want to say it was a coalition of 18 national child advocacy organizations that have termed this as the gold standard. ICWA recognizes and protects the rights of all Indian children to be loved, safe, and connected to their families, culture, and tribal nation. So when we say the spirit of ICWA, because ICWA is the minimum standards, we recognize that when it was written, there was intent within that many were looking at this law and the spirit of that, just as we look at our children and the spirits that lie within all of us. However, as time unfolded, many states began to realize the need to create higher standards to capture more of the intent. So we know that ICWA requires the use of active efforts, and it provides remedial services and rehabilitative program designed to prevent the breakup of Indian families. And again, Laura can put in the chat room a link to ICWA, making sure that everybody has that and they know exactly how the law itself is written. But itself does not define active effort. So the Department of Interior's, their regulations, so the folks who are implementing the Indian Child Welfare Act, worked to improve ICWA implementation and added a final rule or new subpart to ICWA. This rule went into effect on December 12th, so I think 2016. So 4 years ago, the department entered into, they did stakeholder interviews, they traveled across the country, and they really listened to folks out there in Indian country, and again, added a final rule to ICWA. And again, we have that link, so we want to make sure, Laura just put in the Federal Register link, and that talks more specifically about this new rule and the new regulations in 2016. So with that, the department found that Congress intended this requirement of active efforts to provide vital protections to Indian children and their families by requiring that support be provided to keep them together whenever possible. Congress recognized that many Indian children were removed from their homes because of poverty, joblessness, housing issues, and they decided and concluded that agencies of government often fail to recognize immediate practical means to reduce the incidence of neglect or separation. So the benefits of this new rule, the new Bureau of Indian Affairs regulations, included the active efforts. So they talk about the requirements that caseworkers actively engage with Indian families to prevent out-of-home placement. So for those of you that may not have had as much information about active efforts, and I'm thinking that is why we had such interest in this, we now have, since 2016, the new regulations that really talk about and require that there's that active engagement. And you know, for today's webinar, I just want to mention the one pertaining to active efforts, but also recognizing that there are other areas that they looked at with those new rules and those new regulations. And again, for all you legal folks out there who maybe want specifics, just Laura will do her best to put links like the one, the Federal Register, just to make sure that you have somewhere to go. But also, if you feel comfortable or compelled, you can always ask the question. And if there are other folks out there that want to chime in, please don't hesitate. And one of the things I want to mention, because I know we did get some questions before we began, as folks were registering, some questions came in. And I think it's important to note that unlike the proposed rule, the final rule does not define active efforts in comparison to reasonable efforts. I know that there are times folks come in and they want to compare the two. And so the language, you'll see that in the Federal Register, is that after considering public comments on this issue, the department concluded that referencing reasonable efforts, would not promote clarity or consistency, as the term reasonable efforts is not in ICWA and arises from different laws, such as the Safe Family and Adoption Safe Act. So such reference is unnecessary because the definition in the final rule focuses on what actions are necessary to constitute active efforts. So I just want to put that out there to make folks just understand the comparison and just make sure that we're knowing where active efforts is coming from. But I think more importantly, what we want to talk about is how this impacts prevention. One of the things that I felt as an Indigenous person working for the Capacity Building Center for Tribes is just anytime we talk about prevention, I feel compelled to recognize that a lot of the preventative efforts really speak to our traditional ways, our values, our belief systems. And so I also recognize, how when this ties into some of what we're talking about today, I feel like a lot of the conversations have been around prevention. And so I just want to really highlight that, the harder we work with our families, and how do we meet these cultural needs? How do we work harder up front? How can we look at this and tying these efforts and these practices and encompassing our Indigenous ways of knowing, our values? As Indigenous people, we see all of our relations in the work we do. We see our families that we work with as our families. And I know this thinking is not always the thinking of our dominant society. So, because I remember when I was working and providing child welfare services for a tribe, I attended state systems and their core trainings. And they talked about boundaries. They talked about, not accepting gifts and making sure that, the families were your clients and so forth. And it really, it was difficult for me because I thought, but these are my families. And one of the values we have is gifting one another, recognizing one another, treating each other as though they are our relatives. And so I've always felt torn between those two worlds, or those two ways of thinking. But now that folks are really kind of catching on, and I feel like embracing prevention, when we look at families first, and we're recognizing some of the cultural practices and traditions really are that of prevention, and recognizing them. To me, this is where we're going to find some of our more positive outcomes. So the next slide, again, this is something that I feel is always important to think about, to reflect on, is just how important active efforts are to our people. And again, the benefits. I talk a little bit about the culture and the spirit of who we are, but also recognizing, that understanding the history of the United States and the assimilation practices and termination policies and the impact that has had on our families, it's critical now that, we take a look at this. It's important to recognize that Indigenous people, we have inherent rights, that these Indigenous ways of knowing, they're vital to our existence, and that they are why we are still here. We are some of the most resilient people. Our ceremonies, languages, practices, gatherings, belief systems, they're all critical to our survival and to our well-being. So when we can find ways to honor this, to help our families stay intact, or provide resources to safely reunify, I believe that we're going to be turning the page on the disproportionality we see in our systems. And I say this, and I recognize that I get extremely emotional, because this is happening to my family. These are happening to my relatives. So all of this work becomes extremely personal, important to me. I just want to ask for just understanding and patience in this work, and especially now because we know how hard things have been. But I also just really want to emphasize today how important it is to recognize these laws, to recognize these practices, to recognize what we have in place to protect our families and our children. So I say thank you for kind of listening to me, and also perhaps hearing some of my emotions in all of this. And I also want to call on some of the tribes that are here today. We have a question that perhaps you can answer in the chat if you feel comfortable. But I also want you perhaps to indicate why you feel active efforts matters. Because when I want folks who are not with the tribes to really hear and understand why active efforts is important, why is it important for us to work diligently to prevent these placements? Why is it important to you, tribes, to work diligently at reunifying the families and getting them the resources they need? So if you could take a minute, some of the tribal folks out there, and just indicate, why this is important for you, because I want folks to walk away and remember the benefits of active efforts. And please do that throughout. If you're not feeling, the words are coming to you, that's something that you can, continue to share in the chat room as we move through this presentation. I also want to recognize Esther Ann is with us. She is going to be helping with the chat room today and has done a lot of work regarding this. Some of you might recognize her from some of the truth and healing work that's been done out east in Maine. She was very critical in that work. So Esther's going to help a little bit with the chat room for us. So the next slide is just recognizing why this matters for states. So, a part of, and some of you are wondering, hey, I'm with the state and I got invited today. Because one of the things we wanted to do is just recognize that it truly is, ICWA is your responsibility. It's not necessarily the tribe's responsibility. And we also know that when active efforts is done well in your state systems, it helps state workers just do their job more effectively and efficiently. And it also helps them to build important and meaningful relationships with tribes. I've had a wonderful opportunity over the last 4 years to work nationally. And I've also recognized that some of the states who have really taken and brought in the BIA regulations, recognize the ICWA efforts, put in compliance, work diligently and build relationship with those tribes, they are beginning to see better outcomes. And this, I want folks to know that this shouldn't be seen, and I say shouldn't be seen, I can't control how it's seen, but I really want folks to recognize that these efforts are something that it's just a more helpful process in the end when we're working with our families. So for all of you out there, I want to ask a poll question for you. And it will be a scaling question. So I want to know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you in your understanding of active efforts? So as they are coming in, and I'm not sure, can our viewers see these responses, Laura? Is everybody able to?
Not until we share the results after we end.
Okay, so I'm going to tease you all. A lot of folks are saying somewhat confident, and Laura will share the results when they're coming in. We've got most of you answering. So again, how confident are you in understanding active efforts?
We'll give it about 10 more seconds.
Good. So it looks like 25% are somewhat confident, which is, I think, always good, right? I mean, I feel like in everything we do, there's always room for improvement. There's always room to understand more. And I bet those that answered very confident are probably our trainers out there or some of our legal folks. So good. Thank you for answering that and giving us an idea of where you are at with active efforts. So here's a question again, for those of you that may have had opportunities, and I'm not the best at multitasking, and I think so much for Laura. because I can't always watch the chat room, because if I start reading the chat room, then I'll forget that I'm supposed to be talking, and that's really embarrassing. But so if I'm missing anything in the chat room, Esther will grab it. But you know, this talking about, you know, and reflecting on the scale, you know, I mentioned earlier why this is important, and just also wanting folks to take a look at, you know, the responses in the chat room that have come in as to why this is important. But I also, and Laura will provide a link to our ICWA guide. And in there is a tool that was put together through the Capacity Building Center for Tribes. And it really talks more about, you know, the tribal perspective, but also for those of you that want your leaders to understand, because I recognize sometimes our leaders aren't always as familiar with active efforts or with ICWA. And we recognize that the more informed our tribes are, we see more accountability. And again, we see that relationship between our states and our tribal folks. And I also want to acknowledge that, or recognize that practice looks very different throughout the country in how tribes respond. I recognize the very different, and that's probably one of the, I don't know, I want to say more challenging, but I'm always up for the challenge, is recognizing how diverse our governmental structures are in Indian country. So for those of you in the States, you may have maybe 5, 10 tribes, and you probably recognize that tribes can look very differently. They can respond very differently. And I recognize that that practice just can look very different in how those tribes respond. But I again just, you know, want to reiterate, you know, that with a strong understanding of ICWA, you know, I feel that our tribes are able to come to the table, they're able to show up, and they're able to hold some of the state folks accountable and responsible. I've seen folks come in and develop compliance monitoring tools, and then states have had to also pay closer attention. And so that's part of the reason why this matters for tribes. I'm just peeking at the chat room. So what I want to do also is, which is probably the most important part of this presentation, is hearing from a state. The Minnesota Department of Human Services is here with us today. I want to, part of me is, I'm excited. I've worked a lot in Minnesota myself, so I'm pretty familiar with some of the practices. I've had a wonderful opportunity of working for the department and was the ICWA consultant for the state for a few years, and have just so much, I'm just extremely proud of Rihanna Jacobs. Rihanna Jacobs is the ICWA supervisor at the Department of Human Services. And I don't know, Laura, if you want to show everybody Rihanna's slide. And Rihanna is a member of Chanshayapi, and again, is with the Department of Human Services now. And I had the pleasure of working with Rihanna when she actually was working for the tribe as the supervisor. So Rihanna, I'm going to turn this over to you and have you talk about Minnesota's practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. What a lovely introduction. Thank you. So welcome, and thank you, Jackie, for having me here to present on Minnesota's active efforts. As Jackie mentioned, I am a member of the Lower Sioux Indian community, also known as Chanshayape. I am a wife, a mother of 3 wonderful kids, no bias there. Historically, as a child, I grew up in the child protection system, as well as a parent of my oldest child in the child protection system. And in both instances, ICWA provisions were not implemented. And so that where some of my passion stems from for ICWA. I, as Jackie mentioned, worked for my tribal community as a chemical dependency counselor as well as an ICWA advocate, and then in 2016 moved on to the Department of Human Services, where I actually filled Jackie's previous role as the ICWA program consultant at the Minnesota Department of Human Services. And then currently I work as the ICWA supervisor, and a majority of my duties consist of ICWA compliance, ICWA MIFPA compliance, as well as some grants management. So that's a little bit about me and my work. I wanted to get to some fundamental pieces of Minnesota and how we kind of operate. We are a state supervised, county administered, and I believe there are 9 in the nation that operate in this system. We have 87 counties. We have 11 federally recognized tribal nations and communities, 4 Dakota and Ojibwe. We have 2 initiative tribes, and kind of a brief overview of what an initiative tribe is. This program is a collaborative effort between the tribal nations, counties, as well as the state, where the delivery of child protection services for families on reservation are provided by the tribe, from intake to a case completion. Through this agreement, the initiative tribes are able to access state and federal dollars to implement their own tribal child protection system for on-reservation families. So I just wanted to share a little bit about what really impacts the department's work in developing policies and procedures around ICWA and MIFPA. We are really guided by our Minnesota ICWA Advisory Council, which is a statutory body of individuals from the 11 tribal social service agencies, as well as 6 additional individuals from the urban Indian communities. And they really guide our work in development of policies, procedures, and they help to advise our department commissioner, as well as make recommendations on any of the practices and policies that might impact Indian families. So kind of getting to the Minnesota state laws and agreements that really impact our work as well. In addition to the Indian Child Welfare Act, Minnesota has what you've heard me refer to as MIFPA, Minnesota Indian Family Preservation Act. And really this act intent was to protect the long-term interests defined by the tribes for Indian children and their families, as well as preserve the Indian family and their tribal identity, including understanding that Indian children are an essential part of the tribal community, and the tribes really are the expert at child rearing practices for their community. So also what really impacts our work is the Tribal State Agreement, also known as the TSA. This is really a guide for our county agencies and how the ICWA and MIFPA are implemented, and how the work is directed, and how engagement occurs with tribes. So, Laura, do you want to go on to the next slide? So getting kind of to the meat of why we're here for Minnesota, MIFPA active efforts. This portion is really just the synopsis. There's, of course, a more broader definition, but we include acknowledging traditional helping and healing systems of an Indian child's tribe, and using those systems as core to helping the Indian family. So active efforts is rigorous, concerted level of effort. It's ongoing throughout the entirety of the case, continuously involving the Indian challenge tribes from intake to completion, and really using the social and cultural values of the Indian child's tribe and the way of life and preserving the Indian family, as well as to prevent the placement. And so this is from preventative to if out-of-home placement occurs, as well as completion of the case, whatever that may look like. So when an agency has reason to know or believe a child may be an Indian, it's their responsibility to ensure that active efforts are provided to prevent that breakup prior to the removal of a family. Active efforts start at the moment an agency starts working with a family through case assessment, investigation, and ongoing. And they're responsible for actively engaging the tribal community, as well as jointly developing those case plans with the tribe and the family. So we have some, if you want to go to the next slide, Laura. So we have some statutory language that really is specific around what active efforts should look like. Prior to removal, we're looking at, from a state standpoint, what the county agency has done to engage the tribe right off the bat prior to any removal of a child. And are they engaging the tribe to seek guidance on the structure of the family, services that may support the family, whatever barriers exist in keeping the family together. And they also consult and work with the tribe to determine whether or not removal is in the best interest of the child. So going on to the MIFA active efforts required findings. If an out-of-home placement does occur for an Indian child, we really, at the state side, again, look at social services efforts and due diligence in identifying an Indian child and requesting their participation prior to that out-of-home placement removal, and as well as during the, if a removal occurs. Are they requesting a tribally designated representative to evaluate circumstances? Are they providing concrete services to access both tribal and non-tribal? You know, it's not limited to just providing financial assistance, food or housing. There are cultural components. We have in our state statute, is the county agency supporting the family and accessing some services or being able to attend cultural services? So did the county agency also consult with the child's extended family? We do have a state statute or state standard that if a child is removed from their family, is the family member that the child is placed with as a permanency option, are they being provided active efforts to continue the child being placed in their home? So our last kind of provision of MIFPA and active efforts is where visitations arranged in a non-institutional setting, where visits could be maybe monitored by grandmother, were there other relatives who could monitor those visits so that maybe they can go to a park or they could go to an event, or rather than having somebody sit and watch the child and the parent interact with one another. So in our process at the state, there are two processes to really monitor those active efforts. In addition to the active efforts, there are other components that we monitor for compliance. One process, which is out of the tribal state agreement, is the ICWA compliance complaint. So anybody can make a compliance complaint on a county agency if they feel that ICWA and MIFA have not been met. And then our second compliance process is the ICWA compliance review, which stems out of our 2017 legislation that passed, and it's a random sample of children who are identified as Indian children in out-of-home placement. The county has reviewed, a case file reviewed, and if they're found out of compliance for 2 consecutive years, they will see a fiscal withhold. So there is money tied to the ICWA compliance review, and if they're found out of compliance, I believe they receive half of that funding that they would normally have received. So I would like to get to our tribal partners. We at the department really do our own active efforts to engage our tribal partners. And today with us, we have Donna Newgren with White Earth Nation. Donna, if you want to share.
Bonjour, nice seeing everybody here this afternoon. So I have worked for White Earth Nation for 9 years, and I have worked for 2 other reservations in Minnesota. So White Earth is an initiative tribe. It's one of the 2. It's White Earth and Leech Lake, and then Red Lake Nation will be effective, I believe, January 1st, becoming initiative. So with initiative, I work in an urban area in Minnesota, Duluth, Minnesota, and White Earth is 3.5 hours from where I work. So White Earth itself is an initiative tribe, so they do their own social child welfare work. So from reports to intake to case management, providing services, all that. There's no county involvement during that in those cases, but where I work in the urban area, my cases initiate in the county. So I do have county involvement. The county is usually primary unless or until we transfer to our tribal court. And then they would just be financially responsible once that happens. So as I said, I've been working in Duluth for White Earth for 9 years. Initially, when I started, we had the highest amount of cases in state court in the area in St. Louis County. Currently, I think I might have only 4 cases in county court, which is quite a big difference. I have a lot of voluntary cases now. I have cases in other counties. But we have what we did in St. Louis County. We created there's an ICWA court, which is a little different. The agenda is different. The process is different. The way we sit around the table is different. We all are able to communicate together. We meet monthly with the University of Duluth and the judge and the different tribal reps and talk about what's working in this area. So that has been going for a few years already, and I think it goes really well. The other thing is I am available. I'm in Duluth, so prior to that, most of the workers were on the reservation, so they weren't able to meet with the clients and the families. I'm able to meet with those families daily if I have to, and get them services and work with the county worker to do their out-of-home plans, their MAPCs. MAPC is another program in Minnesota, for foster care benefits. So I also work with the university to provide ICWA training, core training to the county social workers. And we have a 2-day training, which in the initial first day is history, why ICWA and MIFBA are important. The second day we talk about the actual application of the work, which active efforts, qualified expert witness. We explain what all those mean, what it looks like in their state system with their program, which is SSIS. And so that's new too. That has only been going on maybe not quite a year. So they get a long 2-day training on with new social workers. I'd like to see that expand to all social workers in the state. Let's see. So we talked about the advisory council. So I am the Duluth representative for the state ICWA advisory council. There are 11 tribes, so 11 reps from each tribe. And then we have representatives from Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Duluth. And I am the Duluth rep. So with that being the advisory council, we do work with the state or this in creating, policies, how those affect tribal nations or tribal people, brochures that go out to Native families to make sure that they are all up, the 11 tribes are in agreement on these policies. We review grants that affect Native families. I'm not sure, I know I was trying to answer the couple questions that were in the chat with the initiative. I hope I did that. The compliance has been a really, the compliance where we're able to write a complaint about a county worker not following ICWA process. So that's been big too and has increased over the years. I think we've also kind of pushed as an advisory council, the state to hire more Native people and to help fill some of those positions to help Rihanna's group. And I hope I made everything. I think I can pass it to Ariel, and if you have questions, just put them in the chat and I may try to answer some of them. Nice meeting everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. And I just want to say thank you to my other co-panelists. This whole experience has been wonderful. The Capacity Building for Tribes has done a great job at reaching out and making us all feel comfortable. It is wonderful to see the number of participants that we have engaged in this webinar right now. I want to introduce myself. My name is Ariel Audi. I'm an enrolled member of Lower Sioux Indian Community. My father is from Sisseton-Watson in South Dakota, and my great-grandmother is Grand Portage. I'm a mother of 3, and then I also have 3 stepchildren in our blended family, so quite a large family. And right now I have the privilege to serve as the Director of Human Services for my community. I'm also on the Mental Health Advisory Council. We've talked a lot about the ICWA Council today, but I sit as the Lower Sioux rep on the Mental Health Council with DHS. Prior to my role as the director, I actually started out as a foster parent. I was fostering my nephews. Then I moved into child protection for my community, children's mental health, the supervisor for our behavioral health services, and then again, the privilege to be the director. We've had a lot of change happen in our community, a lot of exciting new programs and services. We've expanded our relationships with our counties that we work with, as well as DHS. I just want to say thank you to Jackie. I think at the beginning of our webinar, she did a good job of orienting us to having that one heart and that one mind as we talk about active efforts and how it relates to our families. I appreciate her vulnerability and that emotion. I'm an empath, so I feel that a lot. She did ask, why is active efforts important to me? And I think it goes back to being a foster parent myself. I had the opportunity to foster my nephews on a couple of occasions where they did result in that reunification with their parents. There was a reunification with their father, which was my little brother, and then a reunification with their mother. And just that fundamental belief that reunification is the most important thing we can achieve for our families. The second reason would be my father and aunt and uncles spent time in foster care as well as children. And they were always reunified with my grandmother. And my grandmother was a child that had to participate in the boarding schools. So not having that parent relationship herself, not knowing how to be a parent to her own children, having that opportunity to reunify with my father it was a part of breaking that cycle, is a part of breaking that cycle. And thirdly, of course, my work today. We have had the opportunity to grow our team, and we've brought on, non-native social workers, and just always being able to relate to them the value and importance of meeting active efforts, holding counties accountable for their active efforts, and that reunification for our families. A couple of the things that I wanted to touch on from Chanshayapi that I think would be helpful for states and tribes to hear how we kind of approach active efforts. Our neighboring county is Redwood County, and we were able to develop a memorandum of understanding with that county, and it outlines roles and responsibilities for each agency. It has been updated several times, and we continue to meet on it as needed. And it has really helped to build not only the relationships between our tribal agency and the county agency, but it also helps to hold everyone accountable. We do still have the county workers present in our tribal court. So when our tribal social workers are the primary worker assigned in tribal courts, we have that support from the county since they're financially responsible for our cases. And then vice versa in district court. So through the use of our MOU, again, there's that accountability piece. We have it laid out specifically, roles and responsibilities. And then the second topic that I wanted to share is with active efforts in regards to voluntary services. So I sit on the Mental Health Advisory Council, and there's been a lot of discussion with Minnesota DHS on active efforts and MIFPA, how it applies to like CMH services or other voluntary services. And we really appreciate the partnership that we have with Minnesota DHS. I feel they've done a good job at reaching out to tribes to get our feedback, our recommendations, particularly on issues of tribes' capacity, tribal needs. So it's this opportunity has been wonderful to hear Rihanna share her experience, and then to see the participants early on. It was nice to see a lot of familiar faces show up in the chat box. Jackie was going to help and hopefully engage other tribes that may be with us.
This is Esther. There were a few questions that came through the question and answer. Is it this a good time to pose them? Okay, so we had within the chat and the Q&A, a lot of folks really want some more information about this compliance process. Is the compliance staff person within DHHS? What is the process and how does it start? Who does the checks and balances when ICWA is not being followed?
Really good question. I think that's like a whole nother webinar. So it depends on how we receive the compliance. If it's the compliance complaint, there is a corrective action plan that is a requirement out of the tribal state agreement that the department works with the county agency to develop. And it's a plan to really work on how the county agency can change their practice, what barriers are getting in the way of meeting the provisions of ICWA and MIFPA. For the ICWA compliance review, this is really tied to a fiscal withhold. So a portion of the non-federal share for an Indian child who's in out-of-home placement, a case is randomly selected for that county agency. And if a county agency is found out of compliance for 2 consecutive years, they will see half of that fiscal portion provided to them.
And the other question is probably not going to be a short answer. It's really a discussion probably for all of us to think about with MIFVA and ICWA. Why do we think Minnesota is still the highest in the nation for removal of American Indian children? And they wanted to know which state was the second highest.
So I'm not sure what state is the second highest. I know MIFVA is the highest in the nation. However, I think there's a bit of kind of like that qualitative piece that needs to be mentioned that impacts some of that data that we have for Minnesota. We do report on our children in out-of-home placement under initiative tribal jurisdiction. So that's that initiative, those initiative cases that are accessing state and federal dollars through the agreement with the county agency and the state agency. We also report for children who are transferred under sole tribal court jurisdiction because we do ask that county agencies remain fiscally responsible for children who are in out-of-home placement, even though the jurisdiction of the court is changing to the tribe. So we report on those children as well. And in addition to children who are identified as ICWA in state court jurisdiction.
Rihanna, I recognize, and here's what I want to make sure and let everybody know is that there is some really good dialogue happening in the chat room, and I haven't even been able to get through most of it. But I want to assure you that, you know, we will be looking at this closer. We will be looking at ways in which we can provide resources for you. Even if that's maybe having Minnesota folks, you know, answer them, we're going to do the best we can as we continue this conversation. I know, Rihanna, there was also a comment about Minnesota's disproportionality. I don't know if the person who asked that feels comfortable. And again, if you are wanting to, or you really had a burning question and you feel comfortable, we can have your mic unmuted if you feel that you want to ask that question to everybody. It's hard to determine, but I want to assure you we are going to do our best to get the answers that folks are asking. Nope, someone raised their hand. And I'm assuming then you want to be unmuted. So Laura is going to have to help me out in getting you unmuted.
Hi, Stephanie. I think you should be able to unmute now.
Yep, thank you. I'm just wondering if you could share a little bit more about the process of the corrective action plans and maybe some barriers or how you were able to get counties to buy into that process. I'm in a county administered system as well, so I'm just wondering if you can share a little bit about that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, sure. I don't think county agencies are not interested in implementing. I think that there are county agencies who want to support that work, the active efforts work. And so it's really having a conversation and a dialogue with the county agencies, as well as inviting tribal partners to that conversation. So, and really getting a feel for what's happening on a tribal level as well as a county level, and kind of working through those differences. Sometimes it's really beneficial to have those conversations. Other times we do have to refer back to statute. So for buy-in, I think sometimes it's just naturally counties want to participate and, you know, provide families and connecting or keeping connected with their tribal communities. However, sometimes we do have to resort back to our state statute. Sometimes it does get elevated to our commissioner, where a formal letter is sent from the commissioner to the county agency. So it all depends.
Thank you, Rihanna. We had another question that, again, no easy answers. Wonderful questions, people, that get us thinking. When trying to work with a tribe and they are not responsive and not in the same state or area, what are some suggestions to overcome that barrier to get them involved?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, you know, the expectation is there is no expectation of the tribe. The tribe can participate at whatever level that they participate. However, the onus is on the county agency to continue to engage the tribe and provide whatever information that they can to the tribe.
Are there any other folks either on the panel or in the audience that want to weigh in on this?
I can just share a couple of points about that value of relationship building, particularly counties that have tribes that are near them that they may work with often. Reservations and Indian communities are short on resources. I mean, the number of social workers that they may have available to respond to not only the notifications, I mean, those workers are oftentimes social workers as well, meeting with families, providing transportation, coordinating other services. I mean, as tribal workers, we really wear many, many, many hats. And so as counties are able to do so, I encourage that relationship building, trying to make those connections. And then when it comes to, you know, those out of state inquiries, I mean, if you're able to use technology to your benefit, whether it's our websites, whether it's our social media sites, there are ways that you can find other alternatives in communication to try to get a hold of tribes. Just my position would be, though, to understand, you know, the limitations of resources that tribes really have.
There was another question that came up in the chat, and I want to make sure it doesn't get lost. What are the suggestions for doing active efforts with a parent who is in long-term incarceration?
So generally, we give guidance that if a parent is incarcerated, that a system be set up to provide visits if there's a capability of doing that through letters, through you know, Zoom visits if that's, you know, if that's available. That's just really the guidance that we're just giving, that there really needs to keep a connection on that, or planning when maybe a parent comes out of incarceration for how that's going to transition.
Any other folks have any suggestions or ideas?
Well, I know when we've had parents incarcerated, we do meetings with their officer, scheduled meetings. We send resources for housing if needed, see what kind of other programs are available while they're incarcerated so they can work their case plan while they're incarcerated. So when they get out, I mean, it's just finding that stability and visits face to face. We drive kids to the prison to see their parent. So yeah, it's just working with that parent while they're incarcerated to see what we can provide for them while they're there and help them once they get out.
I know I've done some work in the prisons conducting healing circles with Native inmates and found a very valuable resource. It's a little children's book that Sesame Street put out that explains to children the incarceration, and it's been very helpful. Okay, so we had a question. Somebody had asked the definition of an Indian family as it relates to the Indian child. Is it just the biological mother and the child with the exclusion of the sibling, cousins, grandparents as defined by the tribal social services only? This sounds like the definition of extended family, right?
So in this instance, you know, from a state's point of view, we would defer to the tribe. The tribe may have their own familial structural structure. And so we really, as I said at the beginning, you know, defer to tribes because they're the experts at child rearing practices. And so they would have more information and know about that.
Anyone else want to weigh in on the definition of a family? The person that asked that, I'm wondering if that answered your question or not. If not, you can put it back into the Q&A if you need some more specific information. I just wanted to share a comment that a participant made. They said states have the burden of proof of active efforts to the parents regardless if they are in jail or not. We have had cases start over due to no active efforts to the parent incarcerated. Great. All right.
Esther, we have
yes.
someone else who had their hand raised too.
Oh,
so I'm
okay,
gonna
great.
let them.
Wonderful.
Teresa, you should be able to unmute your line now.
Bonjour, I'm Teresa. I'm a parent mentor at the ICWA Law Center in Minneapolis. I just wanted to go back to the conversation we were just having about parents incarcerated and just share a little bit of my story. When my case, I had a previous child protection case open, and I was never even asked at that time if I was Native American. So clearly my case didn't go ICWA. And very shortly after, I was sentenced on my charge to 3 years. And I was given very, very minimal reasonable efforts in that process. And the Child Protection Services recognized that I had a 3-year sentence and they were not willing to keep my case open. And so I was forced to sign over custody to my child's very addicted father. And so I was only in prison for 2 months at that time. I was never given any opportunity to work a case plan while I was there. It was very disheartening. I have, been able to, since that time, go down a tremendous healing journey, which led me to being able to fight for custody back, in which it was returned. But in the meantime, I have recognized the importance of active efforts versus reasonable efforts, and really come to believe that it shouldn't matter if it's tribal or not, ICWA or not. The gold standard should be given across the board. I truly believe that if I had been given active efforts, my case plan wouldn't have gone the way it did, and I wouldn't have had the same fight that I had to fight. But that's just a little bit of my story. Thank you.
Teresa, thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing that, because it really is, the voices out there who have either done the work or have experienced this themselves personally, that really impact what we're doing, why we're doing it. And my heart goes out to your strength. Again, I think, we are extremely resilient as Indigenous people. So I'm looking at the time, and I want to assure everybody that, we will be taking a look at, again, the questions, the comments that are coming up in the chat room. I also just want to encourage everybody, again, to really just, take a deep breath. I hope that most of what we were able to share today, the resources were, we were able to meet some of your needs, recognizing that we may not. I also have seen names in that chat room of what I would determine as ICWA experts, folks who have been doing this far longer than those of us who are presenting today. And I just want to acknowledge all of your work, all of that, the experts out there joining us. And I wished we could bring you all on because I think there's so much more that we could be talking about today on this webinar. But I do want to just make sure that you guys have contact information for us. The next slide just gives you our email address or a phone number with the Capacity Building Center for Tribes. We will, as Laura indicated, follow up with an email. And in that email, you're going to see lots of resources because we will be including the handout sheet posted in the chat, the slides, of course, and everything that we talked about today, links to the Federal Register, and perhaps questions that we can get to, that we can get answered that we may not have been able to do today. And the other thing is there will be an evaluation. So I also, if this is something you want to continue, or you think this is really important, or that we're onto something here with getting the states to invited to the table, again, typically our audience is the tribes. But you feel that, you know, there's something we could be doing more here, you know, be sure to put that in your evaluation. And I just saw an acknowledgement from Dr. Roshonda Shoulders, our federal officer, just thanking so much for this conversation. And, you know, again, her support in continuing a conversation like this, because what we want to do is we want to recognize what the state's responsibility is. You know, we want to recognize where the tribes are coming from when it comes to the Indian Child Welfare Act, recognizing that it's the state's responsibility, but we play a role as tribes. So with that, fill out your evaluation so we can, you know, continue to do our best and move forward and get you the information and the resources you need. I thank you all. I ask that you all have ease in your day, that everybody be able to take care of themselves, given the situation with this pandemic and the grief and the loss. And from the bottom of my heart, you know, to yours, miigwech, thank you and have a beautiful day. Take care, everybody.